kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Pace and Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, November 20th, 7 EST, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Cinemasters Reviews. Really fun show. It's our last pre-Thanksgiving episode, and we are going to be reviewing the Hunger Games prequel, The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, as well as the new Taika Waititi film, Next Goal Wins. First off, before we start, I would just like to say thank you all for watching what little review I was able to post from last week. As some people might know, my power went out at mid-review, which kind of sucks. Thank you, Boatman, for riffing for a little while before Nazari was able to come on and end the stream. But yeah, that sucks. I'll be getting that full edited review out eventually to you guys, I hope sometime this week. But as of now, we're just going to push on through, and we're just going to get started with our very first review of the night, and that being The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is the 5th entry in the Hunger Games franchise, as well, considering that the final book was split up into two movies, as well as the 4th movie that has been directed by Francis Lawrence. Francis Lawrence has directed all the Hunger Games movies since Catching Fire. And you can definitely tell that he's kind of like the author of these movies, kind of as a point. Obviously, Suzanne Collins was the one who wrote the books that these are based off, but Francis Lawrence is kind of given his identity, kind of in the way David Yates sort of has the identity of like the final, the back half of the Harry Potter franchise. And this is a prequel set 64 years before the first Hunger Games, as we are covering the 10th ever Hunger Games, and we are following a young version of, I want to make sure I get his first name right, Coriolanus Snow, who would eventually go on to become President Snow, played by Donald Sutherland. In the Hunger Games films, this time he is played by Tom Blythe. We learned very early on that the Hunger Games were originally just intended to essentially just be kind of like revenge to the different districts that tried to cause a revolution against the Capitol, and they were never supposed to go towards 10. And this movie kind of shows, hey, why did the Hunger Games continue 64 years after they were supposed to end, and how was Snow able to rise up into power? I was someone who I really, really enjoyed the Hunger Games books, at least those first 2 books. Not a big fan of that final book. I don't think it was a very satisfactory ending to that series. And honestly, I feel the same way about the movies. I think the movie was an okay movie. I think it did a really great job at introducing us to Jennifer Lawrence. I think it had a great supporting cast around her, whether it being Woody Harrelson or Stanley Tucci or Donald Sutherland or Elizabeth Banks. I think the second movie was even better. I think Francis Lawrence definitely was a better director for those movies than Gary Ross. And yeah, I just think the Mockingjay story as a whole is just not that great of a story. And I think of all the young adult adaptations of the time, I think that one suffered the most of. It did not need to be 2 movies. You could have made a big 2-hour, 45-minute movie of both those movies just combined, just cut out some things from the book, and you wouldn't really have missed much. So having a prequel come out, now at this point, 8 years later, because Mockingjay Part 2 came out in 2015, I was kind of interested to see if we could really expand upon this universe and whether or not I really cared as a whole. And I'll be honest, I think what Francis Lawrence and Suzanne Collins were able to do with this movie was really, really successful, because I found myself really enjoying The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. That really is a mouthful of a title, but I'm going to have to keep saying it. Something I did really, really enjoy about this movie is you see that the Hunger Games wasn't always as big as it was in those original movies. Obviously, in the future, we see the Hunger Games are like this huge spectacle. The tributes are supposed to be like these icons, these celebrities, people that you're supposed to root for. And I love how stripped down and honestly kind of gritty this movie shows The Hunger Games kind of started out, and it really just sort of puts into stakes how much the idea of the Hunger Games really is, and just how brutal it really is. Of like, they are taking 24 different kids from all these districts and making them fight. There really should be a sense of darkness to those and fight to the death. And I think this movie does a really good job at not glamorizing that in any way and showing how originally it was never supposed to be this like advertised event or something that that the Capitol was supposed to make money on. It was supposed to be a way of revenge towards the district, saying, hey, you do not rebel against us. And I think just thinking like how much time has changed between this movie and what eventually comes with the Hunger Games, which is the 74th Hunger Games, this movie being the 10th. I think that was really interesting. I think this movie has a really, really great cast. I think the person that absolutely steals the show is Rachel Zegler as Lucy Gray, the person that is the girl who is selected to be the female tribute of District 12. So essentially like your Katniss of this movie, although she's technically not like the lead of this movie, even though she is the female lead. Rachel Zegler, like regardless of her choices as an actress about the project she chooses, I think she's someone that has impressed pretty much every time, all 3 times at this point I've seen her. I thought she was great in the West Side Story remake. I thought she was very good in Shazam! Fury of the Gods, and I think she's excellent here. She brings so much charisma to this part. This movie asks a lot of her, whether it's not only just the like fighting and like physical scenes inside of the games, but obviously if you've seen the trailers, the thing that Lucy Gray is known for, even when she's first selected, is this is someone that will sing whenever she feels like she's down. She has this ability to just create songs out of the blue, which does at a point, I do think, I will admit, as an audience member, I did like get grating after maybe like the 5th song, but I just think Rachel Zegler is such a great singer and someone that just has so much charisma that I couldn't help myself but like her. I think she also does a really good job at showing like she's not a fighter in the way Katniss was. And this is a very different tribute that we are rooting for this time, because she's not someone that can just pick off enemies with a bow. She's someone that has to be a little bit more sneaky about what's going on. I also think Tom Blythe is really good as Snow. Snow is someone that like we're not really sure. We know what he eventually becomes, so we know like we're not really supposed to like him. But the movie does a decent job at the beginning of showing like, hey, he wasn't always like for the games. We learn early on that Snow, who is currently studying in college, all of his classmates are supposed to pick a tribute, are selected a tribute to be the sponsor of, and they are supposed to turn those people into celebrities and try to make people root for them in order to get people to watch the games. And as you might have guessed, Snow is given Lucy Gray to be his tribute, and he is the first ever sponsor to essentially fully take the tribute under his wing and really try to help her in certain ways. I think Tom Blythe and Rachel Zegler do have a lot of chemistry, both as an acting duo and later down the line where we do start to see that maybe Lucy and Snow have feelings for each other. Does this complicate things in the way of how Snow is told, hey, you can do anything you want, but you cannot cheat to get your tribute an advantage in the games? But yeah, I think I think Tom Blythe was really, really great as Snow. I wish the other tributes that were in the game were a little bit more fleshed out. Thinking back on the movie, there are definitely like tributes I can like picture in my head, but I can't really tell you any of the names, and they don't really have like a ton of like defining personality traits. There's one female in the games who's definitely like the main foil for Lucy, the one who's like the tough one who's going around just killing all the innocent people. She's definitely the one that like you're rooting against. But aside from her, there's not really like a ton of time with the other tributes, which does kind of suck, because when you think about those original Hunger Games movies, you think of characters like Joanna, you think of characters like Finnick, you think of characters like Cato. Just the fact that it wasn't just Katniss and Peeta you're thinking about. You're thinking about all the other tributes that have a purpose in the games, and I do think that element was definitely missing a little bit in this movie. Something I will give Francis Lawrence a lot of credit with the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is this definitely feels like a movie that could have been split into 2 if the studios would have chosen to make that cash grab pull, but they wisely decided to say, look, let's just make one 2.5-hour movie. and get in and get out. And I think that's a way more compelling story, because if it would have been like 2 movies, they would have padded out like the first half of this movie and made it like a 2-hour movie, and the second half of the movie probably would have been like 2.5 hours, and you end up with two movies that total 4.5 hours, and it just would not have felt as snappy and as fulfilling as this movie does. Even though this is not like a really like snappy movie, it's obviously very long. And something I do find very interesting about this movie is it's very distinctly split into three distinct acts. You have Snow, you have the introduction to Snow and the Capitol and all the supporting characters, and Snow meeting Lucy and him forming a connection with Lucy. Then you have when the game started, which I'll be honest, when the game started as early as they did, my thought was, oh wow, we must just be barreling through this movie, and I'll get to what happens later. But yeah, I was just shocked as to how soon the games do start in this movie. And the second half of the movie is essentially the games, how Snow is able to help Lucy throughout the games. And the third act is the aftermath of everything, and maybe Snow's actions might not being the most honorable to help Lucy throughout the games, and essentially what Snow's consequences are after that. It's not a spoiler to say that Snow survives this movie, or that by the end of the movie he's definitely more in line with his characters in the Hunger Games, where he has a much more cynical view on the world and a much more like dictator like rule of the world. I think the third act was probably the most important act of this film, and I do think, unfortunately, it was probably the weakest act. I don't think it was bad. There was never a point in this movie that I was really bored, which I think is very, very crucial for a 2.5-hour movie. But I think that third act was something you really needed to show why Snow eventually, someone who was willing to stand by his tribute for so long and stand by to say, no, these people from the districts are people. I'm not a slave to the Capitol. What eventually gets him to say, no, I'm willing to put my line on for my life on the line for the Capitol. I'm willing to be a slave to these people, and eventually I'm willing to rise the ranks in order to rule them. And I don't think it was handled in the most compelling way. It wasn't handled in a bad way, but I definitely think it could have helped you see it. You definitely could have had a more interesting villain's journey with Snow, even though I do think Tom Blythe is doing a very, very good job as Coriolanus himself. The rest of the supporting cast, I think, is also very, very good. Viola Davis, I want to get her character's name right. She plays Dr. Volumnia Gall, who is the new games maker. She's essentially like the major like adult villain of this movie. She's the one that's kind of like pulling the strings of Snow and trying to get him to manipulate him into seeing how the games should be in her view. Peter Dinklage plays, oh my gosh, this name is incredible, Dr. Casca Highbottom. Yeah, that's a character name in this movie, like, let's go. Yeah, Dr. Casca Highbottom, we learned that he was the person who created the games, and we also learned that he is beginning to regret them, considering how many lives of children that he sees die every single year. I wish the movie would have honestly explored that more. I think Peter Dinklage is kind of underused, but I think of what we get out of him, I think is pretty good. But of all the celebrity supporting casts, Jason Schwartzman is eating up every single part he has as Lucretius Lucky Flickerman, who we learn is a family member of Caesar Flickerman, who is Stanley Tucci's character in the original Hunger Games, who is also excellent in those movies. But Jason Schwartzman is so good as like the announcer. He has such like this slimy arrogance to him of like, oh man, I wonder how these kids will get out of this when like the most horrible things are happening. He has the best way of like making like a show of it and like entertaining the audience. And like when something starts to become uncomfortable, he's just like, I need a drink. Jason Schwartzman is so funny, and he takes advantage of every single scene he has, even though he does have limited screen time. So I did think Jason Schwartzman was a ton of fun in this movie. And also, like, you can totally tell how him and Tucci's character are related, and I just think that was really, really well done. The last thing I want to say is I loved how simple and like unrefined the arena of the actual Hunger Games in this film is. If you think about those original movies, the first movie takes place in this giant forest where like flames can come out, or like different monsters can be summoned at like a moment's will by the game makers. And that second movie taking place in like a giant like ocean where like you have to swim to different sectors where like there are giant like electric fences. This movie is just like, look, it's a giant like coliseum. There's like there's a level below it so players can go under there to hide. But other than that, like if a player goes up to the coliseum, everyone can see it, and I think that added more stakes. And I think it was fun to see, like, look, the Hunger Games, obviously a lot of technology can change in 60 years, and maybe the technology wasn't always there to make this like the most super scientific, like futuristic event ever. And I think the most fun thing a prequel could do is show how much a fictional world has grown from the time of the prequel to eventually from what we've seen. And I think this movie does a really, really great job at doing it. It also does a great job of showing how the Hunger Games has evolved. Obviously, like I said, the Hunger Games was not always something that was supposed to be this giant spectacle. And by the end, you see how Snow was able to come to the realization of, hey, look, maybe we need to make it this spectacle to make the districts essentially fall in line with us, so we give them something to root for. And I just thought that was incredibly, incredibly effective. I think that just about does everything I want to say about Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. If I were to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I was not expecting to go this high with this, but I'm going to give it an 8. I thought this was a great, great movie. We rate movies on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes. 0 is awful. 10 is great. 10 is amazing. I probably should have said that. But yeah, I think this was a great, great movie. Great origin story of the character of Snow and of the world of Pan Am, which is, of course, the world that the Hunger Games takes place in. If you're, like, not invested at all in the world of the Hunger Games, I don't think this is going to win you over by any means. But if you were a fan of those original movies, this is one of the better ones, and I would recommend you go and see this in theaters if you can. I think this was a really, really well done movie, and I think Francis Lawrence once again showed, like, hey, he had a better understanding of these movies, of this world, than I think people gave him credit for. And I think that was just because he just didn't stick the landing with Mockingjay, which, as I said, is not the greatest source material in the world. Well, speaking of movies that might not have the greatest source material in the world, we're going to be jumping right into our second review of the night, that being Next Goal Wins, directed by Taika Waititi. This is based on a true story with some dramatic fabrications, as the movie says, as the movie says at the beginning. This centers on the country of American Samoa, which was at one time considered to have the worst soccer team on the planet. We are open to them in the opening scene of the movie facing maybe the most crushing loss in soccer history, where they lose a game 31-0. It looks, we flash forward 10 years later, the team is in no better shape, but we might be able to turn things around because they have a new coach from America by the name of Thomas, played by Michael Fassbender. He is someone that has been kicked off every single team he has played on because he has massive, massive anger issues. He has just gotten divorced by his wife. They fired him from the American team because he can't get it done. So maybe Thomas will be able to do something in American Samoa. Taika Waititi is someone who gets a lot of crap. I think not necessarily because of the movies he makes, but I think it's because of the attitude he carries with his movies. He has this very like carefree, fun-loving attitude, which I don't think it's that is the element people don't like. I think it's the fact that, one, he makes like 1 billion projects a year, not just movies. This is the guy who produces Reservation Dogs. He produces Our Flags Means Death. He's in like his shows are everywhere. His movies are everywhere. His face is everywhere. He's a director that doesn't always like to stay behind the camera. He's someone that likes to get in front of the camera, which I'm just gonna say he cameos in this movie as a character. Awful cameo. Like when Taika, like the first moment Taika showed up, I was kind of checked out of this movie. Which I'm just gonna say this right now. This movie is one of the fluffiest, like not only just sports movies, but like feel good movies. And it just got on my nerves, and I just couldn't bring myself to like it because I was so aggravated while watching it. And I want to be clear, making a feel good movie, that is in no way I don't think that should ever be a strike against the movie. I was talking last week how much I loved The Holdovers, which is a feel-good movie. Coda won Best Picture a few years ago, which I know is a movie that some people were not the biggest fan of. I love Coda, honestly. I would recommend anyone go see Coda. But yeah, I just think there's a difference between feel-good and fluffy, and this movie is fluffy to an annoying degree. Every single character feels like a cartoon, whether it's Thomas, who's like cartoonishly unlikable, to the whole team, which like none of the characters on this team feel like real characters, except for maybe one character, which I'll get to, but even that character was handled so poorly. Like, it's one of the biggest like oof moments I've seen in a movie nowadays. Michael Fassbender is a guy who at one point it seemed like he was one of the best actors like working today. And then he just went on a string of bad movies, whether it was the fact that he was Magneto in the X-Men movies when those were getting bad, whether it was Nick and Bo says, 31-0, that's not soccer. Whether it's The Snowman, which is one of the worst like thrillers I think I've ever seen. And then he just stopped acting for a little while, and he came back this year, one with The Killer, David Fincher's The Killer, which is a really, really great movie. Wasn't able to review that, but I was sick. But I know it's on Netflix now, so I'd recommend anyone go watch The Killer. It's a great movie. And he also came back with this, and I think he's fine in this movie, but for the most part, I think he's just kind of phoning it in. I think when he really like gets into like the dark and messed up elements of Thomas, like there's this one scene where him and the team like jog up a mountain, and afterwards you can clearly tell this guy is like a little drunk and just like completely out of his mind, and he just starts going on like the most insane like Any Given Sunday-esque speech. And that is one of the few times in this movie that actually made me laugh. But they didn't give him enough of those moments that it's just not that enjoyable in a way. And it really needs to say the character of Thomas is just unlikable. And I think for part of the movie, I think that's the point. But I don't think you're necessarily supposed to like Thomas at the beginning, but you're supposed to be rooting for him. And the stuff that this character that Taika makes this character do is just something that I just kind of find a little just unredeemable in a way. And just you're never on this guy's side. Whether you see all these videos of him just like throwing balls at his old players or like throwing chairs at the stadium, like you always like there are anger issues, and then there's what this character has, which is like goes beyond that. Let's just get into maybe the most uncomfortable thing about this, and it's not fun talking about this, but I kind of have to bring this up. There's a character in this movie named Jaya, and Thomas learns pretty early on that this is it's a trans woman who's this person, and in order to get on this person's nerves, Thomas just decides, you know what, I'm just going to call you by your dead name, and it does this to show, like, hey, Thomas is a no-nonsense guy, and that in no way gets the audience to like your character. It just shows how much of an asshole this character is, and you didn't need to do that in any way. Like, I think the way how this movie treats this trans character, which I did look up, there was a real trans player on this team, I just found was incredibly uncomfortable, and one of the biggest, like, wow, this is 2023 and we're really going here. Like, I don't think these are topics that necessarily should be shied away from, but I think you got to handle it with a little bit more care. And Taika Waititi, I just showed that, like, his, like, happy-go-lucky, fun nature of, like, oh, man, I'm just going to show the positive elements of life. He did not have the writing talent to handle this incredibly like touchy subject that I think you have to have if you are going to handle this. Minus a few jokes in this movie, I think this film is aggressively unfunny. One of the things one of the funnier moments in this movie is when he does get fired from America, from coaching the American team. Thomas is given like a slideshow where they literally go through like the stages of the stages of grief and the stages of loss, and how he literally goes through each stage. That was kind of funny, but like the majority of the jokes just maybe it's just like a cultural thing where like Taika is just Taika's obviously someone who's from New Zealand, and maybe those jokes just play better there, but these jokes just were not that funny. And like the final soccer game, you literally have like a billion flashbacks because one character suffers a heart attack just randomly out of the blue. We haven't really even heard that they have medical issues, but they just randomly have a heart attack, and it's just okay, that happens. And it's supposed to add more stakes to the final like half of this game, and it just doesn't, from seeing all the characters just like completely like repeating everything we see, and I just don't think that's fun. The team, the actual like soccer team that you're focused on, and like the players we meet, we learn that these are like these like really like awful players, and but they also just have a lot of heart and a lot of spirit, like you see in these like family sports movies. This technically isn't like a family movie, but like it definitely has vibes of those old like 2000s sports movies, whether it's like Miracle or Glory Road. And I just didn't care about the team in this movie, which really sucks. I think that's kind of integral to a sports movie. Like you think of a movie like Remember the Titans, and you think of like players like Sunshine and everyone else, and I think that's just something that makes that movie so well, is how much you care about the different players and the teams. And this one just doesn't really get just doesn't give you a purpose to care at all, except for knowing that they're very bad. But oh man, do they have heart, and they're really going to try as hard as they can, not to win a game, but just to score one goal. Because we learn early on that not only has this team never won a game, they've never actually scored a goal in their entire career as a team. I think just watching this movie, I kind of had the feeling that the era of us enjoying Taika's carefree attitude, not just when it comes to like making a movie, but just when it comes to like just he has the attitude that he doesn't care, but in a bad way. Like there's a scene where Thomas is just in his car driving, and the movie takes place in 2011, but he's listening to a song that was not released until 2014. Like that's not like me like nitpicking. That's just an annoying continuity error that any other director would take 5 seconds to say, hey, we probably shouldn't be doing that, and we need to handle this movie with a little bit more care to show that, hey, we are actually invested in telling the story. But stuff like that just kind of bothers me, and shows that when Taika's always someone that shows like, hey, I'm just here kind of to have fun with these movies, and I'm just here to bring joy to the audience. But you have to show that but you have to show that you are invested when you are making a movie. And I think Taika Waititi, it definitely in Thor: Love and Thunder, he's just throwing stuff against the wall. Even though I do kind of like that movie, I don't hate it as some, but he's just throwing every single idea he has, and it's very unfocused. And this was one that I think the era of us letting him do whatever he wants in terms of movies might be coming to an end with this movie, because boy, this just did not work for me. If I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I would give it 4 out of 10. I think this is quite a bad movie. I saw in the comments, I'll stick to Ted Lasso. Thanks for this insight. Yeah, honestly, if I were to describe this movie in any way, it feels like discount Ted Lasso, which I know even that show, like the sentimentality of that show, can sometimes bother some people. I actually think it's a really good show, but this is like definitely the bad version of that, where you just don't care about anything, and it's hitting all the wrong beats. I would not recommend you go see this movie. Even when it comes on streaming, I think this is one you could skip. Like, it might not be the worst time you have, but it's not going to provide you with a ton of joy. But yeah, thank you all for watching tonight. That does bring us to the end of our show. I should probably get rid of that. Yeah, thank you all for watching. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the video store. It helps grow Cinemaster's reviews, and just helps get all the other videos on the channel just a lot more exposure. Next week, I hope you all enjoy it. Have a nice Thanksgiving, because movies are not going to be taking a break from coming out, and I will be right back next Monday, the 27th. We are going to be reviewing Napoleon, the new Ridley Scott film. Him and Joaquin Phoenix teaming up once again, 23 years later, since Gladiator. Joaquin Phoenix now obviously playing the main character and the title character of Napoleon, as well as the new Disney animated film Wish. 2 pretty big movies. I'm excited to talk about both of them. Once again, just remember to like this video, subscribe, and as always, watch more movies.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day We'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.